President Biden is expanding some protections in Title IX that will impact schools across the country. The changes go into effect as early as August. The new regulations laying out plans for schools with sexual misconduct claims and discrimination allegations. But while the administration meant to clarify federally funded schools' obligations to protect women's rights and student athletes, the language has now changed within the law, and not everyone agrees on it. NewsNation's Elizabeth Pran joins us with more. Elizabeth, how big is the scope of this change?
Well, sweeping changes, Markie. Very much so. Schools are digesting it over the weekend. It not only impacts colleges, but it impacts federally funded schools, K through 12. This was a campaign promise that we heard from the president years ago. Some major points that I want to make. First and foremost, it expands the definition. So sexual discrimination will now include discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. It also changes the way schools conduct assault allegations. So it removes the requirement for cross-examination and in-person hearings. That can be very traumatic for potential victims. That means students won't be disciplined until it's proven that they are guilty of misconduct. Another example of this change would be schools that require students to use the bathroom or locker room consistent with their biological sex. That could be considered discriminating. So what would happen if schools are in a violation? Well, the law does allow a response under Title IX. If those failed by their schools, they can seek recourse from the federal government.
Student experiences a hostile environment at school based on sex, then the law protects against that perpetuation of that hostile environment.
Okay, so what is the government saying? Education Secretary Miguel Cardona releasing a statement on Friday. These final regulations build on the legacy of Title IX by clarifying that all of our nation's students can access schools that are safe, welcoming, and respect their rights. So the issue of transgender athletes, that's a big one. That is still under review, meaning the president didn't really talk about transgender athletes. There's not a ton of detail. Of course, they cannot be discriminated against in a school setting, but the administration didn't really address the athletics. The administration originally planned to include a new policy forbidding schools from enacting an outright ban on transgender athletes, but that provision was put on hold. Lawmakers say that can create a gray area for some schools.
Until they have a rule, the rule that they put forward will stand, and there will be confusion and misinterpretation.
As you know, Title IX was passed in the 70s. The law governs how schools handle sexual harassment claims. But what many of us are more familiar with is this law really leveling the playing field for women in public schools. So critics say this is an enormous setback for women, and it could put them in danger in the locker room.
When I saw the news on what Joe Biden just did to women's rights and Title IX and due process for young men on college campuses and free speech, I was horrified. And my second reaction was, at least I don't have this blood on my hands. I'm ashamed of him.
All right, two sides to every story, right? So on the other hand, Democratic lawmakers such as Washington Senator Patty Murray, right, this is a huge step forward for students, survivors, and everyone who understands the paramount importance of making sure schools are free from all forms of sexual-based discrimination and harassment. So this is also considered a victory from some of the nation's largest teacher unions. They've been advocating for this for years. As you mentioned, Markie, the new rules and regulations will take place in the fall, so August 1st for these schools.
Yeah, a lightning rod issue that always continues to garner polarizing opinions. Elizabeth Pran, thanks so much. We'll follow that closely.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. Also, don't forget to click that red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.